Liam and Ethan Thompson were born into a loving family in the heart of America's Midwest. Liam, the elder by just 14 months, took to his role as big brother with gusto from the moment his parents brought Ethan home from the hospital. As soon as Ethan was old enough to toddle, Liam was right there beside him, tiny hand clasped around tinier fingers, steadying his brother's uncertain steps. Their mother Maggie often reminisced about those early days with a tender smile. Liam was so patient with Ethan, even as a toddler himself, she'd say, flipping through old photo albums filled with snapshots of her two towhead boys. It was like he understood that Ethan needed him in a way no one else could quite match. As they grew, that inherent understanding only deepened. Though both boys had friends at school and in the neighborhood, they were each other's first pick for everything, from backyard adventures to basement fort building to marathon sessions of Mario Kart. David, their father, joked that he and Maggie may as well have had twins for how inseparable the brothers were. It wasn't that they never fought, of course. There were plenty of squabbles over the years, over everything from who got the first turn with a new toy to who called shotgun on family road trips. Ethan, in particular, had a stubborn streak that could rival a mule's, and when he dug his heels in, even easygoing Liam's patience could be tested. But no matter how heated things got, the brothers never stayed mad for long. More often than not, their quarrels ended in laughter, the absurdity of their bickering dawning on them both until they dissolved into giggles. And if one brother took things too far and genuinely hurt the other's feelings, a sincere apology was never far behind. Their bond was a constant source of comfort as they navigated the ups and downs of childhood and adolescence. When 10-year-old Ethan was mercilessly bullied by an older boy at school, leaving him anxious and withdrawn, 11-year-old Liam made it his mission to coax his brother back out of his shell. He spent hours patiently playing Ethan's favorite board games, letting him win every time. He convinced their parents to let them camp out in the backyard on weekends, just the two of them beneath the stars, so Ethan could unload his fears without feeling subconscious. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to smile again, the light returning to his bright blue eyes. A few years later, the tables turned when Liam struggled with crippling anxiety during his junior year of high school. The pressure of looming college applications, combined with a messy breakup with his first real girlfriend, left normally laid-back Liam tense and irritable, prone to snapping at those closest to him. It was Ethan who refused to let his brother push him away. He'd appear at Liam's bedroom door with a cup of chamomile tea and a willing ear, sitting patiently for as long as it took for the words to start tumbling out. He dragged Liam out of the house on weekends for hikes and bike rides, insisting the fresh air and exercise would help clear his head. When Liam's anxiety spiraled into full-blown panic attacks, it was Ethan who researched breathing techniques and guided his brother through the worst of it with a calm, steady presence. "I don't know what I would have done without you this year," Liam admitted to Ethan one night, voice hoarse from an hour-long crying jag brought on by a rejection letter from his top-choice college. "You would have survived," Ethan answered with quite confidence, bumping his shoulder affectionately against his brother's. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Liam. But I'm glad you let me be there for you, like you've always been there for me. That's what brothers do." When high school graduation finally arrived, the Thompson brothers stood side by side in their caps and gowns, identical grins stretched across their faces. They'd both been accepted to their dream schools, Liam to study engineering at MIT, Ethan to pursue business at the University of Michigan. Though they were excited for this new chapter, the realization that they'd soon be living in separate states for the first time in their lives was bittersweet. "Promise you won't forget about me when you're off being a genius inventor?" Ethan teased, elbowing Liam lightly in the ribs as they posed for what felt like the 1,000th family photo. "As if I could ever forget you," Liam scoffed, elbowing him right back. "You're stuck with me for life, kid. Better get used to it." But beneath the jokes and jabs, an undercurrent of vulnerability ran between them. They'd been each other's constants for 18 years, the idea of navigating the world without their built-in best friend by their side was daunting to say the least. That night, as nostalgic relatives finally cleared out and the house grew quiet, the brothers stayed up late into the night talking about their hopes for the future, their fears of growing apart, their unshakable conviction that no amount of distance could ever break the bond they shared. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they drifted off right there on the living room couch, bodies slouched against each other like two mismatched puzzle pieces that somehow fit perfectly. And though the coming years would bring challenges and changes they couldn't yet imagine, one thing would remain forever unchanged: Liam and Ethan, the Thompson brothers, two halves of one whole, bound together by love that knew no limits. The first few months of college passed in a whirlwind of new experiences for both Liam and Ethan. At MIT, Liam found himself thriving in an environment filled with like-minded individuals who shared his passion for innovation and problem-solving. He joined the robotics club and spent long hours in the lab, tinkering with circuits and code until his creations came to life. Ethan, meanwhile, took to the business world like a fish to water. He joined the Entrepreneurship Society and started networking with alumni and local business leaders, soaking up their wisdom like a sponge. He even landed a coveted internship with a startup in Ann Arbor, impressing his boss with his creativity and drive. Despite their packed schedules, the brothers made a point to check in with each other regularly. They had standing Skype dates every Sunday evening, where they'd fill each other in on the minutiae of their lives: Liam's latest robotics breakthroughs, Ethan's growing list of business contacts, the quirks and annoyances of their respective roommates. But as the semester wore on and the demands on their time increased, those weekly chats began to feel less like a lifeline and more like another item on an endless to-do list. Ethan would be in the middle of a story about a fascinating guest lecturer when Liam's gaze would drift to the unfinished project on his desk, his mind already jumping ahead to the next task. Liam would be explaining a tricky bit of code when Ethan's phone would buzz with incoming texts, fracturing his focus. They were both so wrapped up in their own worlds, so singularly focused on chasing their dreams, that they didn't notice the way they were slowly, imperceptibly drifting apart. It wasn't a conscious uncoupling by any means. There was no big fight or dramatic declaration of independence. Just a gradual loosening of the ties that had once bound them so tightly, a subtle reorientation away from each other and towards their individual orbits. When freshman year ended and the brothers returned home for the summer, things felt different. Not bad, exactly, but not the same easy camaraderie they'd always shared. They still hung out, still ribbed each other good-naturedly and engaged in their long-standing Mario Kart rivalry. But there was a new distance there, a sense that they were each holding something back, some essential piece of themselves that the other was no longer privy to. If their parents noticed the subtle shift, they didn't comment on it. Maggie was thrilled to have her boys back under one roof, filling their days with family outings and their favorite home-cooked meals. David, ever the proud father, couldn't stop bragging to anyone who would listen about his son's accomplishments. Liam's already talking about grad school, he'd say, clapping a hand on Liam's shoulder. Kid's going to be the next Elon Musk, mark my words. And Ethan here, he'd continue, ruffling Ethan's hair, he's got a head for business like you wouldn't believe. Apple and Google will be fighting over him by the time he's 30. Liam and Ethan would exchange small, secret smiles in these moments, a silent acknowledgement of the unbreakable bond they shared beneath the surface. No matter how much things changed, no matter how far they ventured out into the world, they would always be the Thompson brothers. Always and forever. But as the summer drew to a close and the start of sophomore year loomed, an unexpected curveball threw the family into chaos. David, who had always been the picture of health, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. Even with aggressive treatment, his doctors estimated he had 6 months to a year left to live. Maggie was devastated, retreating into herself as she grappled with the unimaginable reality of losing her husband. Liam and Ethan were both shell-shocked, unable to process the idea of a world without their larger-than-life father in it. They dealt with their grief in different ways. Liam threw himself into his studies with a manic intensity, as if he could somehow solve the unsolvable problem of his father's mortality through sheer brainpower. He spent long, sleepless nights hunched over textbooks and lab reports, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. Ethan, on the other hand, went into full-on caretaker mode. He arranged his class schedule so that he could come home every weekend, sitting by his father's bedside for hours on end. He accompanied David to chemo appointments, holding the bowl steady as his father retched and heaved. He fielded phone calls from concerned relatives and well-meaning neighbors, always presenting a brave face even as his heart was breaking. For a while, the brothers operated in their separate spheres, orbiting the tragedy of their father's illness but rarely colliding. When they did speak, their conversations were surface level, both of them too raw and fragile to delve into the depths of what they were experiencing. But one weekend, about 3 months into David's treatment, everything came to a head. Liam came home for a rare visit, his face gaunt and his eyes ringed with dark circles. As he stepped into the living room, he found Ethan sitting on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Without a word, Liam crossed the room and sank down beside his brother, pulling him into a fierce hug. And just like that, the dam broke. Months of pent-up fear, anger, and grief came pouring out as the brothers clung to each other, two lost boys seeking solace in the only port they'd ever known. They talked for hours that night, the kind of soul-bearing, no-holds-barred conversation they hadn't had in years. They shared their darkest fears about losing their father, their guilt over not being there enough, their bone-deep terror at the prospect of facing the world without his steady guidance. They reminisced about happier times, two long-ago family vacations, inside jokes that no one else would understand, the 1,000 tiny moments that made up a lifetime of love. And as the sun began to peek through the curtains, they made a pact. No more holding back, no more going it alone. They were in this together, now and always. From that moment on, Liam and Ethan faced their father's illness as a united front. They took turns sitting vigil at his bedside, holding his hand and reading aloud from his favorite books. They planned weekend outings when David was feeling up to it, short trips to nearby parks or drives through the countryside. And when the end finally came, on a crisp October morning just shy of David's 50th birthday, the brothers were right there beside him, anchoring him with their love as he took his last breaths. As they stood hand in hand at his funeral a few days later, accepting condolences from a stream of mourners, Liam and Ethan knew that nothing would ever be the same. But they also knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that they would weather this storm like they had all the others, together, always. In the months following their father's death, Liam and Ethan struggled to find their footing in a world that felt irrevocably altered. Grief was a constant companion, coloring even the most mundane moments with a wash of melancholy. Some days, just getting out of bed felt like a Herculean feat, let alone going through the motions of attending classes and keeping up with coursework. But through it all, the brothers leaned on each other, their bond a life raft in the choppy waters of mourning. They made a point to check in every day, even if it was just a quick text to say, "Thinking of you," or "Having a rough day." They took turns visiting home on weekends, knowing their mother shouldn't have to face the empty house alone. Slowly, painfully, they began to adjust to their new normal. Liam threw himself into his robotics projects with renewed fervor, channeling his grief into creation. He started staying late at the lab again, losing himself for hours in the soothing rhythms of coding and construction. It wasn't that he was trying to avoid his pain, he just needed a productive outlet, a way to feel like he was moving forward even as his heart longed to go back. Ethan, ever the nurturer, found solace in reaching out to others. He started volunteering at a local soup kitchen on the weekends, ladling out steaming bowls of chili and listening with a compassionate ear to the stories of the homeless and hungry. He organized a memorial 5K on campus in his father's honor, raising thousands of dollars for pancreatic cancer research. Slowly, painfully, they began to adjust to their new normal. Liam threw himself into his robotics projects with renewed fervor, channeling his grief into creation. He started staying late at the lab again, losing himself for hours in the soothing rhythms of coding and construction. It wasn't that he was trying to avoid his pain, he just needed a productive outlet, a way to feel like he was moving forward even as his heart longed to go back. Ethan, ever the nurturer, found solace in reaching out to others. He started volunteering at a local soup kitchen on the weekends, ladling out steaming bowls of chili and listening with a compassionate ear to the stories of the homeless and hungry. He organized a memorial 5K on campus in his father's honor, raising thousands of dollars for pancreatic cancer research. As the first anniversary of David's death approached, Liam and Ethan knew they wanted to do something special to honor his memory. They decided to take a road trip to all of their father's favorite places, the small Iowa town where he grew up, the Chicago hot dog stand he always raved about, the secluded lake in Wisconsin where he'd taught them to fish. It was a bittersweet journey, every landmark and memory a reminder of what they'd lost. But it was healing, too, in a way they hadn't expected. Sharing stories and laughter, retracing the steps of their father's life, they felt closer to him than they had in months. And in the quiet moments, as they watched the sun sink below the horizon or counted the stars flickering to life above, they felt the weight of their grief begin to lift, just a little. After the trip, something shifted in the brothers' relationship once again. The intense, all-consuming nature of their shared mourning began to ebb, replaced by a deeper, more mature form of closeness. They no longer needed to talk every single day to feel connected, the bond was there, an unshakable foundation, even as they began to refocus on their individual lives and goals. Liam started dating a fellow engineering student named Hannah, a whip-smart, quick-witted woman who made him laugh for the first time in what felt like years. Ethan threw himself into his business coursework, impressing his professors with his innovative ideas and tireless work ethic. They celebrated each other's triumphs, big and small, Liam's game-changing robotics breakthrough, Ethan's selection for a prestigious leadership conference. And when setbacks and disappointments came, as they inevitably did, they were there to listen and encourage, to remind each other of their strength and resilience. When Liam and Hannah broke up during senior year, Ethan was the first person Liam called. He showed up at Liam's dorm room with a six-pack of beer and an open ear, ready to lend his shoulder and his irreverent humor in equal measure. And when Ethan was passed over for a coveted internship at a top consulting firm, Liam was right there to boost his spirits. He dragged Ethan out for a day of go-kart racing and greasy pizza, determined to take his mind off the rejection. "Screw 'em," Liam declared as they careened around a curve, Ethan's laughter ringing in his ears. "You're too good for that stuffy corporate nonsense anyway. You're going to start your own company and be the next Jeff Bezos, just wait." Through it all, the brothers never lost sight of what mattered most: family, friendship, the unbreakable bond they shared. And as college graduation loomed on the horizon, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as they always had, together. When the big day finally arrived, Liam and Ethan stood shoulder to shoulder in their caps and gowns, just like they had 4 years ago at high school graduation. Only now, the boys were replaced by two strong, resilient young men who had weathered unimaginable loss and come out the other side even more certain of their love for each other. As their names were called and they crossed the stage to accept their diplomas, they could almost feel their father's presence beaming down on them. In that moment, all the pain and heartache of the past few years faded away, eclipsed by an overwhelming sense of pride and possibility. At the post-graduation celebration, as their mother looked on with misty eyes, Liam raised his glass to offer a toast. To Ethan, he began, voice thick with emotion. "My brother, my best friend, my partner in crime. I couldn't have made it through these last 4 years without you." Ethan clinked his glass against Liam's, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Back at you, brother," he said. "We've been through hell and back, but we did it together. And I know Dad would be so damn proud of us both." There was no mention of the uncertain road ahead, the job searches, the moves to different cities, the complicated dance of adulthood that awaited them. In that perfect, shimmering moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the love between two brothers, an unshakable foundation that would guide them through whatever trials and triumphs lay ahead. The celebration stretched late into the night, laughter and tears mingling freely as family and friends reminisced about the past and dreamed of the future. And as the last guests finally trickled out, Liam and Ethan found themselves alone in the backyard, sprawled out on a picnic blanket beneath the stars. For a long time, they were silent, each lost in his own thoughts. Then Ethan spoke, his voice soft but certain in the darkness. "Hey Liam." "Yeah? Promise me something." Liam turned his head to look at his brother, brow furrowed. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter where we end up or how crazy life gets, we'll never let anything come between us. That we'll always have each other's backs, always be there when it counts." Liam swallowed hard, suddenly overcome by the depth of his love for the man beside him. "I promise," he said hoarsely. "I promise, Ethan. Always and forever." Ethan reached out, gripping Liam's hand in his own. "Always and forever," he echoed. And there in the soft summer darkness, beneath the watchful gaze of a million glittering stars, the Thompson brothers made a sacred vow. A vow to stand by each other, to lift each other up, to weather every storm and celebrate every triumph side by side, just as they had since the very beginning. A vow of unbreakable brotherhood, now and always. Life after college was a whirlwind of change and new beginnings for Liam and Ethan. Liam accepted a job at a cutting-edge robotics company in Boston, thrilled at the chance to work on groundbreaking projects with some of the brightest minds in the field. Ethan, ever the free spirit, decided to travel for a bit before settling into a career, booking a one-way ticket to Thailand with plans to explore Southeast Asia. The night before Ethan's flight, the brothers met up at their favorite hometown diner, the one with the sticky vinyl booths and the waitress who'd known their orders by heart since they were kids. Over greasy burgers and chocolate milkshakes, they made a pact to stay in touch no matter what, to never let the time zones or the miles come between them. "I'm serious," Liam said, pointing a French fry at Ethan for emphasis. "I don't care if you're in the middle of the Gobi Desert or the Amazon rainforest. You find a way to call me, at least once a week. Got it?" Ethan grinned, swiping the fry from Liam's hand and popping it into his mouth. "Got it, boss," he said around a mouthful of potato. "Same goes for you, though. No getting too caught up in your fancy robot world to remember your lowly backpacker brother." Liam rolled his eyes, but his smile was fond. "As if I could ever forget you," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken on their high school graduation day. "You're unforgettable, Ethan Thompson. For better or worse." The first few months apart were an adjustment, but true to their word, the brothers made an effort to stay connected. Ethan regaled Liam with tales of his adventures over crackling Skype connections, riding elephants in Chiang Mai, scuba diving off the coast of Bali, getting hopelessly lost in the winding streets of Hanoi. Liam kept Ethan updated on his projects at work, geeking out over the latest advancements in machine learning and artificial intelligence. But as time went on and their lives got busier, those check-ins became less frequent. Ethan's travels took him to increasingly remote locations, places where Wi-Fi was spotty at best and charging his phone was a luxury. Liam's work ramped up, demanding longer hours and more mental energy than he'd ever expended before. They still texted when they could, still sent each other silly memes and inside jokes. But the long, rambling conversations of their youth were replaced by quick check-ins and surface-level updates. The time differences made real-time communication tricky, and they often found themselves playing phone tag for days on end. It wasn't that they loved each other any less, or that their bond had weakened. It was just the natural drift of two adult lives moving in different directions, the inevitable growing pains as they navigated their own paths. And yet, even as the weeks stretched into months without a proper catch-up, they each felt the absence like a physical ache, a missing piece that couldn't quite be filled. Everything changed on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in April. Liam was in the middle of a team meeting when his phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Normally he would have let it go to voicemail, but something made him excuse himself and step into the hallway to answer. "Hello?" he said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "Is this Liam Thompson?" a female voice asked, tinny and distant. "Yes, this is Liam." "Who's this?" "My name is Dr. Patel. I'm calling from Bangkok Hospital. I have you listed as the emergency contact for Ethan Thompson." Liam's heart plummeted into his stomach. "Is he okay?" he asked urgently, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What happened?" "I'm afraid your brother was in a serious motorcycle accident," Dr. Patel said gently. "He's in critical condition. We're doing everything we can, but I think you should get here as soon as possible." The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Liam booked the first flight he could find to Bangkok, haphazardly throwing clothes into a suitcase as he barked out instructions to his stunned co-workers. He called his mother from the cab to the airport, his voice shaking as he relayed what little information he had. The journey to Thailand was the longest of Liam's life. Every minute felt like an eternity, every mile stretching out endlessly before him. He couldn't sit still, couldn't focus on anything except the sickening dread churning in his gut. Ethan had to be okay. He had to be. Liam couldn't imagine a world without his brother in it, couldn't fathom facing a future alone. When he finally arrived at the hospital, jet-lagged and hollow-eyed, he was ushered straight into the ICU. And there was Ethan, his vibrant, larger-than-life brother, looking so small and fragile amidst a tangle of tubes and wires. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, his leg encased in a massive cast. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. Liam sank into the chair beside the bed, hot tears spilling down his cheeks. He reached out and took Ethan's hand, mindful of the 4-line snaking from his wrist. "Hey, brother," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere, okay? Not until you wake up and tell me to stop being such a sap." For days, Liam kept vigil at Ethan's bedside, leaving only for quick showers and vending machine meals. He talked to his unconscious brother constantly, reminiscing about their childhood antics, updating him on the latest happenings at work, even reading aloud from the dog-eared copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance he'd found in Ethan's backpack. Slowly, painfully, Ethan began to heal. The doctors marveled at his progress, calling him a miracle case. Liam just smiled and squeezed his brother's hand, knowing that if anyone was stubborn enough to defy the odds, it was Ethan Thompson. When Ethan was finally discharged from the hospital a month later, Liam took a leave of absence from work to help him with his recovery. They rented a small bungalow on the outskirts of Chiang Mai, spending their days reading on the porch, exploring the local markets, and working through Ethan's grueling physical therapy exercises. It was during those long, humid nights, as they lay side by side in the darkness, that the brothers finally had the conversations they'd been putting off for years. They talked about their hopes and fears, their regrets and dreams, all the things they'd left unsaid in the busyness of their separate lives. They laughed until they cried, and then cried until they laughed, the catharsis of it all leaving them raw and open in a way they hadn't been since they were kids. As the weeks turned into months and Ethan grew stronger, the brothers began to plan for their return to the States. Liam's job was waiting for him in Boston, and Ethan had decided it was time to put down some roots, maybe even apply to grad school. They were excited for the future, but also nervous, knowing that the cocoon of their time in Thailand would soon come to an end. The night before their flight home, they sat together on the beach, watching the sun sink into the Andaman Sea. Ethan was quiet, his gaze distant as he traced patterns in the sand with his toes. Liam nudged him gently with his elbow, a silent question. "I was just thinking," Ethan said softly, "about how close I came to losing all of this. To losing you." He turned to look at Liam, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I let us drift apart, Liam. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you like I should have been." Liam shook his head, his own eyes stinging. Don't, he said firmly. Don't do that, Ethan. We both let things slide. We both got caught up in our own lives. But none of that matters now. He reached out and gripped his brother's hand, just like he had in the hospital all those weeks ago. What matters is that we're here, together. And we're never going to let anything come between us again. Ethan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. No more drift, he agreed. No more excuses. From now on, Liam said, it's you and me against the world, brother. Always and forever. Always and forever, Ethan echoed, squeezing Liam's hand tight. And as the last rays of sunlight danced across the water, the Thompson brothers sat in contented silence, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, their bond stronger than ever before. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing, not time or distance or the vagaries of life, could ever truly come between them. They were brothers, now and always, and that was a truth as unchanging as the tides. Returning to life in the States after their time in Thailand was a bittersweet transition for Liam and Ethan. On one hand, they were excited to dive back into their careers and start building the futures they'd always dreamed of. But there was also a sense of melancholy, a wistfulness for the cocoon of closeness they'd cultivated during Ethan's recovery. Liam threw himself back into his work at the robotics company, energized by the cutting-edge projects on the horizon. But he was also more mindful of balance than he had been before, making a point to unplug from work mode and invest in his relationships outside the office. He started hosting regular game nights at his apartment, inviting friends old and new to bond over board games and craft beer. Ethan, true to his word, enrolled in a graduate program for sustainable business, his near-death experience having crystallized his desire to make a positive impact on the world. He approached his studies with the same passion and curiosity he'd always brought to his travels, staying up late to pore over case studies and geek out over innovative solutions to global challenges. Despite the demands of their separate lives, the brothers made good on their promise to stay connected. They scheduled weekly video chats, no matter how busy they were, just to check in and make each other laugh. They took turns visiting each other's cities, Ethan crashing on Liam's couch in Boston and Liam exploring the hipster haunts of Ethan's adopted hometown of Portland. But the real test of their bond came about a year after their return from Thailand, when Liam hit a major roadblock in his personal life. He'd been dating a woman named Sarah for several months, and things had been going well, until they didn't. Sarah, it turned out, wasn't ready for the level of commitment Liam craved, and she ended things abruptly, leaving him reeling. Normally, Liam would have bottled up his heartache, throwing himself into work and shutting out the world until the pain subsided. But this time, he did something different. He picked up the phone and called Ethan, pouring out the whole messy story in one long, rambling voicemail. Not even an hour later, his phone pinged with a text from Ethan: "I'm booking a flight. Be there tomorrow." True to his word, Ethan showed up on Liam's doorstep the next evening, duffel bag in hand and a six-pack of Liam's favorite IPA under his arm. He didn't say much, just wrapped Liam in a bear hug and held on tight, letting his brother soak his shirt with silent tears. Over the next few days, Ethan was a constant presence, a steady anchor in the choppy waters of Liam's heartbreak. He listened without judgment as Liam rehashed every moment of his relationship with Sarah, offering perspective and empathy in equal measure. He dragged Liam out for long walks along the Charles River, the crisp autumn air a balm to his battered soul. One night, over a bottle of whiskey and a game of chess, Liam looked up at Ethan with a sudden, fierce urgency. "Thank you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "For being here. For always being here, even when I'm a mess." Ethan just smiled, knocking back a swig of Jameson. "That's what brothers do," he said simply. "You'd do the same for me." And Liam knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that he would. That he would drop everything and cross oceans for Ethan, just as Ethan had done for him time and time again. It was a turning point in their relationship, a deepening of the bond that had always been the bedrock of their lives. From that moment on, they were more than just brothers, they were each other's emergency contact, each other's first call in a crisis, each other's truest home. The years that followed brought more challenges, more triumphs, more moments of leaning on each other when the world felt too heavy to bear alone. When Ethan's startup venture floundered and he had to lay off half his staff, Liam was there, helping him craft a battle plan and shore up his flagging spirits. When Liam was passed over for a big promotion at work, Ethan was the first person he called, venting his frustration and self-doubt into the wee hours of the morning. And when their mother's health began to decline, the brothers banded together like never before. They tag-teamed caregiving duties, Liam flying out to Chicago every other weekend and Ethan taking extended leaves from work to be by Maggie's side. They held each other up through the long, terrifying months of hospital stays and specialist visits, through the gut-wrenching decision to move their once vibrant mother into a nursing home. On the day they finally laid Maggie to rest, after a long and valiant battle with Alzheimer's, Liam and Ethan stood shoulder to shoulder at the graveside, hands clasped tightly as the casket was lowered into the earth. They were the only family each other had left now, the last remaining threads of the tapestry their parents had woven. And then there were two, Ethan murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears. Liam squeezed his brother's hand, a lifeline in the crushing grief. "Two is enough," he said softly. "Two is more than enough, when it's us." In the wake of their mother's death, the brothers made a pact to start prioritizing their own happiness, to stop waiting for someday and start living for now. Liam quit his corporate job and started freelancing, freeing up his time to travel and explore his long-neglected hobbies. Ethan sold his startup and used the profits to bankroll a round-the-world trip, determined to share his love of adventure with as many people as possible. They still had their separate lives, their individual pursuits and passions. But they also made a point to carve out dedicated time for each other, whether it was meeting up for a yearly ski trip or planning surprise visits on milestone birthdays. They were each other's best man when they finally found their forever partners, beaming with pride as they stood at the altar and watched their brother pledge his heart to another. And when they became fathers themselves, Liam to a baby girl and Ethan to twin boys, they savored the joy of watching their children grow up together, forging the same unbreakable bond they'd shared since birth. Family reunions took on a whole new meaning as the next generation of Thompsons ran wild through Maggie and David's old house, filling the rooms with laughter and light once more. Through it all, through the decades of distance and change and inevitable drift, Liam and Ethan remained each other's constants, each other's true north. They were more than just brothers, they were soulmates, two halves of a whole, bound by a love that had been forged in the fires of shared joy and sorrow and tempered by the unshakable faith they had in each other. And on quiet nights, when the world was still and the memories came rushing back like a flood, they would sit together in contented silence, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. Two boys who had started out sharing a cramped bedroom in a Midwestern suburb, now grown men with rich, full lives and hearts overflowing with love. "We got lucky, you know," Ethan mused one evening as they sat on Liam's back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the dusky light. "Not everyone gets a bond like ours." Liam smiled, clinking his beer bottle against Ethan's. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he said softly. "We worked for this, every damn day. We chose each other, again and again, even when it would have been easier to let go." "I'd choose you every time," Ethan said fiercely, his eyes bright with emotion. "In 100 lifetimes, in any version of reality. I'd always choose you, brother." "Always," Liam echoed, his heart too full for more words. And there on that porch, bathed in the golden glow of a life well lived, Liam and Ethan Thompson sat in the sacred silence of a love that had endured everything, a bond that had been tested and tried and found unbreakable. They were more than brothers, more than friends, more than any label could encompass.